Welcome to Disability Justice Behind, that there's no disability justice behind bars. There we go. I'm Shaya French, and I work with the organization Black and Pink that does LGBTQ prison abolition. And I also am a community organizer at the Boston Center for Independent Living.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Douglas Rogers. I work with Black and Pink, the LGBT community here in Boston and around the country.
And so we wanted to talk today about some of the commonalities between the disability movement and the prison abolition movement and the fight against institutionalization. And Douglas is going to share some stories about his experiences in prison and about how disabled people are treated on the inside, as well as how the prison system itself is a force that disables people. And then I'll follow up with a discussion of the abolitionist movement and some of the places for where there are intersections between how the disability movement and prison movement can work together.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Douglas Rogers, a former incarcerated individual dedicated to the work of Black and Pink with the LGBT community of every race, ethnicity, and creed of color in Boston and around the country. I would like to give you a little format of my incarceration. While I was in FMC Devens, which is a medical center where they place individuals that have disability mishaps. And I was fortunate enough to care for individuals that were in there that had hospice. I did hospice, I did dialysis prevention. I also sat with suicide prevention. And you know that certain individuals, when they actually come into these institutions do not provide adequate medical treatment at all. So it was my duty to help individuals that were there. And me being a former incarcerated individual, I took the initiative to help each and every one that had a disability problem and the disability that they came into the institution. As you know, certain institutions, when you are arrested, they take you out from your wheelchair and they place you in a van that's stainless steel. You're actually taken from your wheelchair and you're placed in this type of environment where you're not able to get around on the institution because most of these grounds are without any concrete. They're mainly dirt and different things of that nature, so you're not able to function and get around in those institutions. I was fortunate enough to help and fight for individuals that were coming in with disability and help them achieve certain medical equipment that they needed. Due to the fact that I was going against the system, going against the state government, I was thrown in segregation. I was placed in 23-hour lockdown for up to 6 months, away from my family, away from my loved ones, not receiving my mail, and also because I was mainly outspoken for the humane and untreatment of individuals that were disabled. I was released back out into the general population after 6 months, and I continued the fight. I continued working with hospice, I continued doing suicide prevention, and I continued sitting with terminally ill individuals that were terminally dying in the institution. But I was also sexually assaulted by a prison guard while I was in there because I stood up for the LGBT community and for transgender rights inside the prison. That is my goal today and every day for the last 13 years. I've been fighting for the mission for people and our creed and color. It doesn't matter to me, but I think and I believe that we all should be treated as human beings around this country and also while they're incarcerated. I have been with Black and Pink for the number of 13 years fighting for rights for transgender, LGBTQ individuals. I am also on the leadership circle here in Boston and around the country with Black and Pink, and I continue advocating for the rights for inmates inside as well as inmates outside. I continue my work as an abolitionary. I continue fighting for the rights to end solitary confinement with the DOC here in Massachusetts. I continue marching to the State House for the rights of individuals that are incarcerated and also for the rights to get equal medical care inside these facilities. Because inside these facilities, as I said, they leave you with nothing. They take your dignity away from you. And if you are gay or bi or trans, you're treated worse. You shouldn't be victimized just because of your sexuality. You know, it's inhumane. So I want to let you know that I'm a supporter and I continue to campaign for solitary confinement. And I also fight for the rights of individuals that are locked up, individuals that go to court. I'm there giving support to individuals that are going through these trials and tribulations because I was incarcerated myself, as I said, for a number of 15 years inside. So I dealt with individuals being mistreated, and I always stood up for the rights of inmates inside and also helped individuals that were in wheelchairs, individuals that needed dialysis, that needed a kidney. You know, people don't realize that the bottle of water that you drink, they're being denied at South Bay clean drinking water. Norfolk, they're being denied water that you may take for granted. This bottle of water is something, treasure, to those that are inside because they're not drinking proper drinking water. It's inhumane the way they treat individuals inside. I know certain people may say they committed a crime. We understand that. But you don't have to mistreat anyone. You don't have to abuse them, put them in solitary confinement because they disobeyed a direct order. One infraction in the DOC, you can get up to 10 years in solitary confinement, 23 hours locked down. Some men and women are being denied showers. How would you feel being put away and not able to take a clean shower, to put on underpants? I'd like to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming out. And I continue fighting for the rights of disabled individuals because after I was assaulted from the prison system, from the prison guards, now I have a disability. So I take what I do very seriously. So I ask that you ladies and gentlemen, when you have time, I'll be downstairs, I'll have material for Black and Pink to help individuals if you would like to write pen pal. Give some support. Let them know that they're not forgotten. You know, it's a terrible thing where you're sitting behind a wall in a cell 24 hours in a day, and everybody lines up for mail call and they just don't get no mail. You know, what does it cost a postal stamp? 60 cents? You know, you'd probably spend more than that just going to the coffee shop. I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you that are here in this room, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas. Um, so I want to share a little bit about what I've learned about the prison system and the prison abolition movement working with Black and Pink, and also I've been writing to someone who's locked up for about 5 years now. And I think the first thing to understand is that the vast majority of the resources of the prison system are going to control poor people, people with disabilities, people of color, LGBTQ people, immigrants, and that we often think about or talk about the prison system as though it is about who is guilty or innocent, and that in fact only like 5% of cases actually go to any sort of jury trial. And in the vast majority of cases, people are threatened with incredibly high prison sentences that basically, that when someone is arrested, they throw at you sort of anything that might possibly apply that you could be charged with and tell you that number. And most people decide that rather than risking 15 years if the jury trial goes the wrong way, that going with like 3 years and take that charge, have it on their record, and then continuously get caught in that system with being when people get out on parole and have like incredibly restrictive rules about like how often they can leave their house or if they can use any substances whatsoever, and then continuously get caught back into the system. And as abolitionists, part of what we stand for is that this is a system that does that causes an incredible amount of violence, as Douglas talked about. That solitary confinement is a pretty normal part of people's experiences. Several years ago, Black and Pink did a survey of thousands of our members and learned that 85% of respondents had been held in solitary confinement. And of those, almost half had experienced 2 or more years of solitary confinement. That's devastating. And I think we also know that like prison is just something that creates disability, that it creates a lot of trauma and psychiatric conditions, and as well as like physical abuse, as Douglas experienced. And I think one of the things that I find somewhat hopeful is that this system is actually pretty new, that we've only had prisons in this country for about 200 years, and that prior to that, and that we've only had mass incarceration, the incredible increase in how many people are locked up since about the 70s. And so that there are other forms of addressing harm in our communities that people have, for most of human history, have been how people have addressed harm. And one of the like movement principles for the abolition movement that I find really helpful is this idea of non-reformist reforms or abolitionist reforms. So when you have an incredibly when you have a goal that is incredibly visionary and incredibly far out there, that getting rid of prisons, like that's not something that's probably going to happen in the next 5 years, and what do you do and what do you work on and how do you know the little steps you're taking now will make a difference? So Ruth Wilson Gilmore is someone who's written about abolitionist reforms and non-reformist reforms, and how I think about them is that so first you start with having a really clear end goal, having no prisons and having community-based solutions for when people do harm. So transformative justice work, things that Mia Mingus works on, as well as Generation 5 and Philly Stands Up and a few others have really good resources. But the second is that when you're working on a campaign, that you don't do anything that gives more power back into the system that you're opposing. So, for instance, Black and Pink is often asked, given how bad it is for LGBTQ prisoners, would you consider building a new LGBTQ facility that would make things safer for people who are locked up? And the answer to that is no, because we know that every single prison that's built, it just gets filled up. And that we would be allocating more money to the prison system and allowing more people to be locked up in that move. So instead, we work on campaigns that are harm reductionist for some of the things that are really terrible that are happening now. So working on a campaign to end solitary confinement, ending cash bail, working on the water in Norfolk, and also working on decriminalizing. So decriminalizing drugs and decriminalizing sex work. And I think another important part of non-reformist reforms is that in your own work and in the rhetoric you use and the policies you use, you don't throw anyone under the bus. And so that means that if there is a policy that's proposed that would make things better for people who had committed drug crimes while at the same time making things worse for people who had possessed weapons or had killed people, we would not accept making that sort of sacrifice and compromise. And I think that this is also a really helpful principle to think about how we hold our movements intersectionally. So for the disability movement, one thing that, as a disability organizer, I sometimes hear people talking about how they, saying things like, if you think jail is bad, you should try being in a nursing home. And using the comparison to emphasize how awful the loss of freedom that people have experienced, rightly so, in nursing homes and rehabs, that feels incredibly unfair to people by setting up this sort of like hierarchy of institutionalization. And I think that we can all hold that no one deserves to receive inadequate medical care. No one deserves to have the basic decisions of their life taken away. No one deserves to be cut off from their friends and family and be relegated to visiting hours. No one deserves to be abused. And take that as a broad stance as a disability community to be against institutionalization in all of its forms. And also with the reality that what kinds of institutions you are likely to face in your life is partly based off of skin color, is based off of other marginalization statuses. I think another place where I see places where the disability and prison movements have a fair bit of commonality is that often isolation is a key theme. So as Douglas was talking about writing to pen pals and how that's incredibly important, I wonder about how we as a disability community and people who are often feel isolated in their homes because it's not very accessible or you don't have access to transit, that writing to people who are locked up is a really powerful form of solidarity. And similarly, that one of the pieces of work that Black and Pink does is going with people to their court appointments. And so for people who are unemployed, that oftentimes it's hard to find people who are available during 9 to 5 and is really valuable when people can, just be there for the awfulness that is court. So if you would like to be engaged in Black and Pink, if you're in the Boston area, this coming week we are processing a lot of mail. So we get mail from people who are locked up across the country, and people are asking to get the newspaper, people are asking to put their name in a database for pen pals, and are holding basically sessions every day this week, and also generally hold them twice a week. To do basic data entry and help people out. And if you're in the Bay Area, I know that that this is being streamed, some pieces of it, to the Bay Area. Look up Flying Over Walls, the San Francisco Bay Area Black and Pink Facebook page. And we are happy to talk more about that and have flyers up here. And I would now open it up to questions. And we got 4 more minutes.
Hi. A question I had, and I don't know if it's a little peripheral to what you're doing, but you mentioned about not putting power back into those systems that may be part of the problem, is restorative justice is really catching on around Massachusetts, but my concern is a lot of times, at least in my town, the police are taking the lead on that, and I know people who are working one-on-one, who have people in the system incarcerated who are really concerned about the fact that a lot of these diversity task force, like the one in my town, is partnering with the police department. The police are taking the lead on restorative justice, and they see that as undermining what restorative justice is about, A. And the other problem is, at least what I've seen firsthand, and I don't know what might be going on, is restorative justice is widely available in my town, which is a majority white town, but I'm worried that it's not being offered to other towns, communities of color, where it might be more needed, because those are people who are more vulnerable to becoming incarcerated. And I'm not sure if you're doing anything with that, and of course there's the intersection of disability as well.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point in that this is from Arlington, to be suspicious when it's police who are leading the restorative justice efforts. And I mean, I think one thing is when we are practicing restorative justice in our communities, in our faith communities, in like grassroots organizations, and are building our capacity, that we can offer an alternative when people so that, if a community group that wants to do restorative justice practice can opt into one that's not controlled by the police. I think that's an important piece. It's oftentimes, a lot of the transformative justice groups have really struggled for funding, and so making sure that we're funding this work is particularly important. And I think you also bring up a really good point about where these other options exist. So that one thing that I think about is that most white folks have experienced a lot of prison abolition in their life. That, that people who are experiencing drug addiction in white communities are not getting locked up, and that people are, there's incredible amounts of crimes of different kinds that are happening, and that where incarceration is not being used. And so to continue to push on that and think about the racial justice element.
Thank you both so much. Douglas, I was wondering if you could talk a little more, if you're willing, about how you see disability justice also intersecting with reentry to society after prison. If you want to talk about your experience or experiences of people you know and that you've supported, how you see that we could have more disability justice when people are reentering.
Well, I think what they do need to have is more adequate medical care for individuals that are coming out. Right around the down here on Mass Ave, we got Huntington Avenue. There's a halfway house there. It's called Coolidge House. It's to me, they don't provide any medical equipment. So individuals that will be placed there into this halfway house setting, because it's a transition. Once you've been released out from prison into society, they do send you to a halfway house. And there's no funding there. They don't offer anything. Their suggestion is, if you can't work back into the society, and give them 25% of any income that you are having in your pocket as a paycheck, you're considered to go back inside the prison walls. Yes. If you're disabled, they don't provide chucks. They do not provide a medical bed at this halfway house. I was at this halfway house for 6 months due to my medical issues. They said either get a job or you go back to prison. That was their solution to the problem of my medical, with my disability. So, I say to anybody that has a loved one or friend, we have to mobilize to make a change. We know that we got somebody in the White House that, each and every week there's something new. It's like a circus. I never seen so much that's going on inside the White House, and these people that are coming home and they're talking about prison reform. Then you got Kanye West talking about prison reform. It sickens me, because I'm out here on the street every day fighting for the rights of prisoners, transgender, gay men as myself, and have suffered at the hands of these institutions. Did I answer your question?
Sorry, this Holly. Unfortunately, we're out of time. But we have about a little less than 10 minutes if you do want to continue to have conversation with these fabulous panelists for the next few minutes. Otherwise, let's express our appreciation for their time and energy.